Hello and welcome to the History of the Blood War series. I am your presenter, Jay Onwuka, and this is the second of 3 intro videos for this series itself. In this video, I want to lay out my approach to this material about the Blood War. So I'm going to talk about what I'm trying to do with these videos and also give some notes about my sources. I'll start with my sources actually, and the first thing about my sources is the setting. The history of the Blood War series will be dealing with the outer planes of the core D&D cosmology. These outer planes are usually depicted as being the same between different settings, so for instance, characters from both Faerun and Krynn travel to the same Isgard and the same Pandemonium. Eberron is an official exception, but it is still reachable through the outer planes. It's simply a more difficult journey. The second edition Planescape setting forms a lot of the bones of what I'm laying out with this series, but I will be primarily focusing on the Blood War itself, whereas Planescape was more about sampling multiple planes. One of the aims that I have with this series is to present the Blood War in a way that it can be used by people who prefer non-D&D rule sets or people who prefer to think of these ideas in a story before stats way. That said, my sources for this series are exclusively Wizards of the Coast published material and, for the most part, only material published for the core D&D setting. That is to say, I'm not going to use any books specific to Forgotten Realms, Eberron, and so forth. The major exception here is Planescape. Now I know the setting which D&D publishes with its core rulebooks has shifted through the years, but all the core D&D publications include the concept of shared outer planes, so for our purposes, we can consider the treatment of everything outside the material planes as a mostly continuous setting. In published material, I will be considering rulebooks to be the main point of reference. This includes not just the Player's Handbook and Monster Manual, but also books like the Complete Books, the Manual of the Planes, and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Like I said, this excludes everything with a setting-specific branding. After the rulebooks, I will consider Wizards-published magazine content such as from Dragon or Dungeon, and then non-setting specific adventures. Now, of course, there isn't just one Dungeons & Dragons. As of recording, there are at least 5 official published editions of Dungeons & Dragons. Bringing them all together means dealing with a lot of contradictions and changes between editions. One way that I navigate these differences is by setting general priorities for which edition that I'm going to favor. My priorities at this moment are 3rd edition as the highest, then 2nd, 5th, 1st, and 4th. And now let me give my reasons for listing them in this order. 3rd edition is my baseline for one simple reason. It's the edition that I started playing D&D with. I'll admit that it makes at least as much sense to make 2nd edition my highest priority since it has the most information directly about the Blood War, but I'll give 2 reasons for figuring them in this order. The first reason is that I feel that 3rd edition's main purpose was to take the ideas of 2nd edition and give them a more palatable rule set and presentation. I've never played 2nd edition myself, so I can't say whether or not 3rd edition was a positive streamlining attempt, but I've read enough to know that streamlining the game was a major driving force behind the design of 3rd edition. I also think that 3rd edition has a good amount of creative additions to the Fiends, both in lore and in the creatures themselves, which makes it a great resource for research. 2nd edition is considered next highest because it includes both the setting of Planescape, which gives a lot of information about the other planes, but it also has most of the basis of the Blood War concept. I had said that I had 2 reasons that this edition isn't the highest priority, and the second of those reasons is this. Though there is a lot of the Blood War in 2nd edition, it is not all well thought out. Little things like the Hezro Dark Walks that I talk about in the Hezro video show that sometimes not every I was dotted. Things that can be made to make sense are still being kept in, of course, but 2nd edition is not the kind of slam dunk on how things should go that it might appear. It's best thought of as a jumping off point for thinking about this great Blood War idea. 5th edition seems to be a streamline of 3rd edition and a course correction from 4th, which I will talk about later. It's also the most recent edition, so it's the one that people are most likely to be playing. That said, 5th edition can play fast and loose with the old lore, and where there's a conflict, I will almost always prefer the version presented in 3rd and 2nd editions. Now, 1st edition, which is next, is of course the beginning of the game, and just because it is the beginning, that gives it a sort of historical value, and for that reason I am placing it above 4th edition. And now 4th edition is the lowest edition because it represents such a break with the rest of the mainline Dungeons & Dragons editions. The Great Wheel cosmology, which had been held as the standard throughout the history of the game, and was even compatible with the coexisting World Tree cosmology, was completely destroyed in 4th edition in favor of a World Axis cosmology, which was not compatible with anything that came before. Also, so many monsters get different graded versions in 4th edition, so it's clear to me that they were more interested in padding out the monster count than in coming up with great and unique monsters. Now, I do still check 4th edition sources whenever I can, and I do refer back to books like the Demonomicon frequently, but the fact that 5th edition undoes the cosmological changes of 4th edition feels like enough of a reason to not count it that highly. Now, what I'm doing with this History of the Blood War series is gathering all the information that I can on certain subjects and interpreting them in a way that does its best to respect all the sources that I have. The thing about the Blood War as a concept is that, as interesting as it is, there isn't a whole lot on the ground. Just as an example, here are a couple of paragraphs from the 2nd edition set Hellbound: The Blood War from the book The Dark of the War in the section Divisions of Power. The lesser Batizu pass along the order from the high-ups in the chain of command. They're middlemen. They enforce the desires of the greater fiends on the masses of the least Batizu, their whips and spears driving lemures and Nuparibos into battle. Lesser Batizu also fill out the second ranks of the fighting forces. Their intelligence and might bolster the mindless masses of the bulk troops. And they actively scheme to ascend to the next rank, that of Greater Batizu, seeking power as a mortal seeks bread and water. Greater Batizu shoulder the responsibility for sending the rest of their numbers into the Blood War. They give the commands that lesser fiends must enforce, and they watch over the development of the race and the promotions from least to lesser to greater. In fact, the lower fiends look to them for guidance and support. Now, that's just a basic sketch of what the organization of devils is like. It doesn't tell you who follows which orders if there's a conflict, or how to understand the difference between a Kornugon or a Gelugon's purpose in the war, or any of these sort of detailed questions that are actually really important. I feel that to really get to grips with the Blood War as a setting that's ready for campaigns anyway, there needs to be more understood about it. What I'm doing here is taking the details that we get in the books, like the one that gave above, which is basically just sort of fluff and flavor, and taking these ideas one or two steps farther. Rather than simply stating that the greater devils command lesser devils, I want to give you the structure of a devil legion, as you can check out in my Military of the Devils overview. When I have to expand beyond what is strictly stated in the text, I first try and think about how I can apply the details in the text to other situations. Then I try to apply essential details, such as the innate drives of devils and demons, to these situations. And finally, I try and find examples of similar things in our own history or society. With these pieces together, I aim to give a very plausible version of the Blood War for people who are interested in getting deeper into that subject. Now, with all of that said, obviously you shouldn't simply take my ideas as gospel. Just like I'm using the source material as a jumping off point for these videos, I hope that you will use what I'm presenting here as a jumping off point for your own stories. I would love to hear about these themes being used in different settings and with different rulebooks. My sympathetic setting, which I did a couple of videos on, is actually based on the theme of the Blood War. The eternal conflict in that setting isn't a duplicate, but the Blood War was certainly its inspiration. Now I think I've come to the end of this video. This is the second of 3 new intro videos to give a sort of baseline in what I'm doing with this history of the Blood War series. I hope that you found what was in this video interesting, engaging, and I hope that I will see you again for the next video very soon. Thanks.